Now we are in the last part or last chapter for this subject, Fundamentals of Accountancy, Business and Management 1. Oh, last chapter na because the next step in accounting cycle would be the preparation of financial statement, and that will be the topic for your fundamentals of ABM part 2, first semester of your grade 12. Now, the last topic that I would like to discuss to you is all about the chapter 11 of our books, which is called the adjustments. No, the adjustments. So, bakit ba tayo nagkakaroon ng adjustments? Luckily, if you are an accounting students or accounting graduate, you will be dealing with a lot of adjustments. So, mahalaga na marunong tayong mag-adjust, and gamit na gamit yan in accounting, the adjustments. What is adjustment? So adjusting entry, so at the end of an accounting period, you might have incurred expenses but not yet paid for them yet. And you might have earned income but not collected it yet. Use adjusting entries to recognize transactions that have occurred but not been recorded. Now, pag sinabi mga adjustment entry, this is not the normal transactions in the business. No? Kaya nga tayo nagkakaroon ng adjustments, ito ay para i-correct or itama ang expenses or di kaya naman ay revenue. Kasi pag hindi natin ginawa ito, maaring magkaroon tayo ng overstatement sa revenue and then understatement sa expenses. And the result of this, mali ang ma-generate nating income statement, and that will be part of your fundamentals of ABM part 2. Okay? Now, so let's continue. What are the two types of adjustments made at the end of accounting period? Take note, nagkakaroon ng adjustment at the end of the accounting period, no? All right, so yung mga adjustment na marahil ay mangyayari, let's say for example, mangyari during in the midst of the month, that is not called adjustment. Maybe we can call that the credit memo or reversing entry of the erroneous entry previously made. But when we say adjustment, this happen at the end of the accounting period. So there are two types of adjustment that we are going to recognize or to record at the end of the accounting period. First, deferral. So ano ba itong mga deferral? Is the postponement of the recognition of an expense already paid but not yet incurred, or the revenue already collected but not yet earned. The entry in effect decrease the balance sheet account and increases an income statements account. So here are some examples of deferrals of prepaid expenses. So we will talk this one by one later. And let's start na, no? Let's prepaid expenses. Some expenses are customary paid in advance, no? Prepaid expenses. So pag sa prepaid, let's say for example, mga prepaid load, no? This is one of the example of this. So once you bought or purchased a load, let's say for example 50 pesos, and then you are going to consume this 50 pesos data load for 3 days. So we can record this as your prepaid expenses. So this is asset, no? Asset mo pa ito, pag-aari mo during the time you purchase that one. But since this is an expenses, no, na magagamit mo for 3 days period, so every day you are going to update what is the balance of your prepaid expenses. The same concept in this transaction in accounting, but this time hindi hindi ito maiiksing prepaid expenses, like for example ngayon example natin na load na for 3 days, but it involves a long period of time. So let's say for example nga nito ay mga supplies, no? Let's say bumili ka ng isang box na supplies, no? Isang box na coupon bond. And you will record this coupon bond as part of your asset, no? It will be recorded as part of your asset since naroon pa naman yan, hindi nagagamit. But at the end of the month or at the end of the accounting period, once you counted, ilan na lang ba ang natira, no, sa iyong biniling coupon bond, it means nabawasan na ang iyong asset. And then you need to recognize or to record an expenses. That is the purpose of adjustment. So, hindi na nanatiling asset itong mga to. Kasi nga, nagagamit. Kaya prepaid expenses ang tawag. Nagagamit mo siya, nakukonsume mo siya. Or di kaya naman, example ay rent. Let's say, nagbayad ka at the beginning of the month. This is my payment, advance payment for rent. No, payment for rent for 5 months. No, so it means you have an asset that is called prepaid rent. No, prepaid rent. But at the end of the month, ibig sabihin nabawasan na yung iyong asset since na-consume or na-expired na ang 1 month. No, ilan na lamang ang natitirang renta mo. Okay, so that is called the prepaid expenses. So prepaid expenses are asset, not expense. Take note of this. Prepaid expenses are asset, not expense. Kasi nga hindi pa nagagamit. At the end of the accounting period, a portion of all of these prepayments have been expired. The portion of an asset that has expired becomes an expense. So that's what I mentioned earlier. No, we need to recognize an expense at the end of the accounting period since na-expired na or nagamit mo na, nagamit mo na yung asset na yan. No? So that is called the prepaid expenses. So let's have an illustration here. So nung March 1, paid 3 months insurance amounting to 6,000. No? March 1, nagbayad ka ng insurance amounting to 6,000, but this insurance is good for 3 months. No, not good for that day. No, good for 3 months. So it means you need to record on March 1, prepaid insurance, that's debit 6,000, and then syempre binayaran mo siya, credit to cash 6,000. So payment for 3 months insurance. So at the end of the month, at the end of March 31, there's a 1 month insurance already used. So we need to record an expense and to update the balance of the prepaid insurance. Okay, so how we are going to record this? So insurance expense 2,000 and then prepaid insurance 2,000. Paano nangyari yon? So yung 6,000 na ibinayad mo nung March 1, that is good for 3 months. Okay? So it means every month you need to recognize a 2,000 expense. Why? So paano nangyari? How? So 6,000 divided by 3 is 2,000. So noong March 31, nagkaroon ka na ng expense na 2,000, kaya nagkaroon ka ng debit na 2,000. And then, nabawasan ang iyong prepaid insurance ng 2,000, kaya mayroon kang credit na 2,000. So it means, this 6,000 prepaid insurance at the beginning of March 1 ay hindi na 6,000. Kaya kasi mayroon kang record na credit at the end of the month, which is March 31 na 2,000. So 6,000 minus 2,000. So it means ang balance na lamang ni prepaid insurance once we saw or once we post it at the general ledger is 4,000. No. I hope that is clear. No, medyo this is a challenging topic in accounting, the adjustment entry. At medyo limited ang ating time. So if you have some question regarding this topic, you can watch again since this is recorded, no? Recorded itong ating presentation. So I'll share to you the link para mapanood nyo uli or mapakinggan nyo the presentation of this adjustment. No? Now, let's have another illustration. So yung ating illustration dito kanina is prepaid insurance. So let's say naman yung mga supplies, no? Supplies, since this is part of prepaid expenses, no? Example of prepaid expenses. So nung March 7, purchase office supplies amounts to 7,000. So nung March 7, magkakaroon tayo ng record na recording na supplies, that is debit 7,000, and then of course binayaran natin yan kasi yung office supplies na yan, so cash 7,000. So payment for office supplies. On March 31, so nagkaroon ng inventory counting. Ibig sabihin, binilang, mag-ilan na lang ba ang natitirang supplies. So at the end of the month, March 31, the inventory count showed that the supplies costing 6,300 are still on hand. So ang natitira na lang daw noong March 31 sa supplies na binili noong March 7 ay 6,700. So it means mayroon tayong nagamit na magkano? 7,000 less 6,700, 6,300 is equal to what? 700. That's why we need to recognize an expense since naigamit na natin yung supplies na yan. So supplies expense, that is debit, 700, and then supplies, credit, 700. So the balance na lamang ni supplies ay 6,300. All right? So I hope that is clear. Now, let's talk about the other thing that we need to make an adjustment or adjusting entry at the end of the month, which is called the depreciation of property, plant, and equipment. When an entity acquires long-lived assets such as buildings, service vehicles, computers, or office furniture, it is basically buying or prepaying for the usefulness of that asset. These assets help generate income for the entity. Therefore, a portion of the cost of the assets should be reported as expense in each accounting period. So anong ibig sabihin nun, no? So alam naman natin na lahat ng property, mga plant and equipment except for jewelry and land are subject for depreciation. So ano ba yung ibig sabihin ng depreciation? When we say depreciation, ito yung pagbawas ng halaga ng iyong ari-arian, no? Nababawasan ang halaga ng iyong ari-arian once na ginagamit ito. Let's say for example, you buy or you purchase an iPhone ngayon, no? Let's say ang halaga ay 100,000, no? May ganun ba ang halaga ng iPhone? And then sabi mo, ayoko na ng iPhone. I would like to sell it nung magamit mo na after a week. Do you think that iPhone ay may bibili pa ng 100,000 the same amount or kung the same amount nung iyong bilhin? So wala na, di ba? Kasi nga sasabihin, nagamit mo na no? So it means every property, plant, or equipment are subject for depreciation. Except nga yung aking binanggit, like land and jewelry. Kasi ang lupa ay hindi nababawasan ng halaga. Nag-a-appraise pa or tumataas pa ang value. And of course, mga jewelry, mga gold. Alright? Now, but other than that ay talagang subject for depreciation. Now, there are 3 factors involved in computing depreciation expense. So magkakaroon tayo ng computation. Actually, once you are in the college na, no, there are different method on how to compute depreciation. But this time, I will share you the common, yung pinaka-common lang, no? That is the straight line method. So, factors involved in computing depreciation expense, that is asset cost, is the amount an entity paid to acquire depreciable asset. That is also called the original cost. Kung magkano ibinayad mo sa asset na binili mo, that is your asset cost. Estimated salvage value or estimated scrap value or estimated residual value. Ano pa bang ibang tawag dyan, no? But the common estimated salvage value is the amount that the asset can probably be sold for at the end of its estimated useful life. Bakit may gano'n? No? May estimated salvage value. So lahat kasi, or most, hindi naman lahat, no? Most of the asset, let's say for example, refrigerator, no? Nung masira, may value pa ba? Yes, pwede mo pa siyang ibenta sa junk shop. That's why we need to know magkano kaya ang estimated salvage value or scrap value or residual value of this asset. No, kapag hindi na gumana, sira na, maaari pang ibenta, magkano kaya maibebenta? Okay? So that is called the estimated salvage value. But there are properties or mga kagamitan na kapag nasira wala na talagang halaga, no? But kapag binenta ka sa jam shop, kahit pa paano magkakaroon pa yan ng halaga, no? Kahit pa 100 piso, no? So that's called the estimated salvage value, or we call it sometimes scrap value, residual value, no? Huwag kayong malilito diyan. Kapag nasa given ay scrap value or residual value, that's also the same. All right, so next factors is estimated useful life. Is the estimated number of periods that an entity can make use of the assets. Useful life is an estimate na an exact measurement. No? Kaya nga mga estimated useful life. So lahat naman kasi mayroong span. Even the life of the people ay may span. No? It's biblical. No? Merong sabi ni David, 60 or I almost forgot, parang mga 70 or 80 lang, no, ang edad ng tao. It means meron tayong estimated useful life. So ganun din sa asset. No, ganun din sa asset, no, based on the historical data. O ilang taon bang magagamit itong computer na ito? Kapag medyo maingat ka sa gamit, maaring tumagal lang 5 years. No, parang ganun, maaring tumagal. So that is the estimated life of that asset. So before or bago samantalang kayo bumibili ng mga kagamitan, you need to know. Tanungin niyo yung nagbebenta, mga ilang taon kaya namin itong magagamit itong microwave. From that, mako-compute natin how much is your expense every month. No? Kasi kailangan natin ito in computing your expenses for that assets. No, let's say for example, yung aking cellphone, no, bumili ako halimbawa ng cellphone na tig 6,000 lang yata to, no? And then tinanong ko, mga ilang taong ko 'tong magagamit? Sabi mga 3 years daw. So a maximum of 3 years. So it means mako-compute ko na, mag-iipon na ako para at the end of 3 years, nakaipon na ako ng pambili ng panibago. Kasi nga na-compute ko na kung magkano yung aking expenses for this asset. Okay, so let's compute. Ito yung formula, no? Don't forget this one. So asset cost. So that's the original cost. Ileles natin yung salvage value or yung residual value or scrap value. Ang magiging sagot niyan ay depreciable amount. And then divided it by the useful life, ang magiging sagot naman niya ay depreciable or depreciation for the period. Okay, so take note of this formula and then gagamitin natin yan later. All right, illustration. March 31, to record depreciation expense. Assume service vehicle acquisition cost is 500,000. The useful life of this service vehicle is 30 years, no? Sabi nung nagbenta ay 30 years daw ang pwedeng magamit itong service vehicle. And at the end of its useful life, no, kung nasira na, maaari mo pa itong ibenta ng 50,000, no? Chachap-chap yung mga mga piyesa nito at nagkakahalaga pa daw yan ng 50,000. Okay? So, paano natin i-record? So let's say ito binili nung March 1. No? Let's say assume na binili natin ito nung March 1. No? So nung March 31, papaano natin siya i-record yung expenses or depreciation expense for this service vehicle. Okay, so nung March 31, magkakaroon tayo ng depreciation expense for service vehicle 1,250 and then credit to accumulated depreciation vehicle 1,250. So paano nangyari? So let's see the computation. Sabi natin, ang formula ay asset cost less estimated salvage value. Ang sagot ay depreciable cost divided by the useful life, that is 30. And then mayroon tayong yearly depreciation expense. No? So 15,000 is the yearly depreciation expense. But this time, we need to record the monthly depreciation. That's why we need to divide it by 12. So the answer or the monthly depreciation expense is 1,250. Okay, ganun lang kadali, no? Ganun kasimple. Because we have a formula na susundan. Ayan, madaling i-substitute lamang ang mga given data to the formula and then we will arrive to the correct answer. All right. Okay, let's have another example or illustration. March 1 to record depreciation expense pa rin. Assume March 1 natin binili itong equipment na ito, no? Assume equipment acquisition cost is 60,000, useful life is 5 years, no? So no given salvage value or residual value. Siguro wala nang talagang ka-value ito pag nasira na itong equipment na ito. Okay? So ang paano natin siya i-record? Depreciation expense equipment 1,000 and accumulated depreciation equipment 1,000. So paano nangyari? So asset cost is 60,000. So wala tayong ibinawas since walang salvage value. So 60,000 pa rin ang depreciable cost divided by the 5 years useful life. So 12,000, that is the yearly depreciation expense. So divided uli natin by 12 since we are looking for monthly depreciation expense. That's why the correct answer is 1,000. That's why ang ating record, mayroon tayong depreciation expense equipment 1,000 debit and accumulated depreciation equipment credit 1,000. Okay, I hope those are clear. All right, so next is allocating revenue received in advance to revenue. There are times when an entity receives cash for services or goods even before service is rendered or goods are delivered. When such is received in advance, the entity has an obligation to perform services or deliver goods. The liability referred to is unearned revenue. Allocating of revenue received in advance. So this time, kasi 'di ba, pag mga advance payment ni customer, that is a liability na ine-record natin as a liability na natin sa kanila. Nung nagkakaroon tayo ng entry na cash and then credit to unearned revenue. Now, kapag na-perform na natin yung service or naibigay na natin yung goods for sa client na yon or sa customer na yon, kailangan nating magkaroon ng entries for that. Now, let's say this one. On March 6, John's company received 20,000 as an advance payment to be rendered at the end of the month. Okay. So, ito yung ating record nung March 6. Cash, 20,000 debit, and then credit to unearned revenue, 20,000. To record the service rendered nung end of the month, no, nung katapusan na ng buwan, that is March 31. So we need to what? To debit unearned revenue since wala na tayong utang kay customer. Na-perform na natin yung service no? And of course, service revenue. So i-record na natin siya as service revenue. Okay, so another types of adjustment. So yung una ay deferral, no? Ngayon naman ay accrual. Now, what is accrual? Accrual is the recognition of an expense already incurred but unpaid, or revenue earned but uncollected. Okay? Expense already incurred but unpaid. Ibig sabihin, nagamit na natin yung mga expenses pero hindi natin nababayaran. Samantalang na-provide na natin yung services, ibig sabihin may revenue na dapat tayo pero hindi pa natin nasisingil yung ating mga customer. All right? So this adjustment deals with an amount unrecorded in any account. The entity in effect increases both a balance sheet and an income statement account. Accruals would be required in two cases: accruing expenses to reflect expenses incurred during the accounting period that are unpaid and unrecorded. Accruing revenues to reflect revenues earned during the accounting period that are uncollected and unrecorded. So here are some examples: accrued expenses and accrued revenue. Okay, so let's take a look. What is accrued expenses? So an entity often incurs expenses before paying for them. Cash payments are usually made at regular intervals of time, such as weekly, monthly, quarterly, or annually. If the accounting period ends on the date that does not coincide with the scheduled cash payment date, an adjusting entry is needed to reflect the expense incurred since the last payment. This adjustment helps the entity avoid the impractical preparation of hourly or daily journal entries just to accrue expenses, salaries, interest, utilities, and taxes are examples of expenses that are incurred before payment is made. Okay, so ito yung mga example mong salaries daw, mga expenses, mga utilities. So let's say for example, no? Kasi yung mga, let's say yung mga utilities, no? Nagamit na natin saka pa lang sisingilin. So that is called the accrued expenses. And the same as the salaries, right? So tinrabaho na muna nila bago natin sila babayaran. So it means na-incurred na yung expenses before we're going to pay them. O gano'n naman talaga ang kalakaran. Hindi bayad muna bago trabaho. Trabaho muna bago bayad. Okay? So paano ang example nito, no? Illustration natin ng accrued salaries, no? There are weekly payroll or so ibig sabihin weekly nagpapasweldo. So may mga ganyan kasi kahit dito sa Pilipinas, although this is much practices in US, mga weekly payroll or weekly sila nagpapasweldo. Kasi sa US, as long as maka 40 hours ka a week, okay na. Kahit mga 3 days ka lang pumasok, basta makompleto mo yung 40 hours, ay pwede ka nang hindi pumasok. Kasi pag pumasok ka pa, nag-work ka pa, you are entitled for the overtime pay. Kaya sa US, maraming mga tao doon na minsan tatlo pa ang trabaho. Kasi they don't have, wala silang halos time, no? Pasok sila ng maaga, and then basta matapos nila yung trabaho nila or whatever. Unlike here in the Philippines, mayroon tayong 8 hours na sinusunod. But there, no, as long as matapos mo yung 40 hours a week, no, you are good to go. Okay? Now, let's go back here. Weekly payroll are made on Friday for 5 days work week. So it means 5 araw ka magtatrabaho, and then at the end of 5 days, magbabayaran ka na ng empleyado mo. Assume that the calendar for March appear as follow. Nagkaroon ng problema kasi because of this calendar. So it means yung itatrabaho ng Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, babayaran yan ng hapon ng Friday. Pag umuwi ng hapon ng Friday, may sweldo ka na yan. Okay? And then, tinabaho 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Sa 12 ng hapon, ay mayroon ka nang tatanggaping sweldo. Nagtrabaho ka ng 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, sa hapon ng 19, bago ka umuwi, mayroon kang sweldo. Nagtrabaho ka ng 22, 23, 24, 25, 26,
bago ka umuwi ng 26, mayroon kang sweldo. Ngayon nagka-problema, no? Because ang March, mayroong 29, 30, 31. So it means, itong 29, 30, 31, dapat mayroong 1 and 2. So sa April 2 ka dapat palang sisweldohan. But this 29, 30, and 31 ay expense for the month of March. That's why we need to make a record for the expense for this 3 days for March. Why? Kasi kung tayo magre-record pa ng April 2, kasi April 2 ka pa pasisweldohan. So it means magiging over recording ng expense for the month of March and under recording naman tayo for the month of March. Over recording for the month of April and then under recording for the month of March. So paano natin ito gagawa ng adjustment entry? So let's compute, no? So assume that each of the employee's salary is 12,832.50 per month or 590 per day. No, 590 daw per day ang sweldo ng mga empleyado. And then there are 2 employees for that company. So there are 2 employees. So salaries expense is 3,540, that is debit, and then credit to salaries payable. Bakit salaries payable? Kasi nga babayaran pa natin sa empleyado sa April 2 pa. Ay kailangan lang nating maisama sa expenses, salaries expense sa March kasi part of March expense, no? So remember yung ating mga accounting principle na diniscuss previously na dapat kung kailang month siya nagamit, doon dapat siya mare-record. That's why we need to make an adjustments. Okay. So paano na compute yung 3,540? So yung empleyado daw, ang hourly or daily wage niya ay 590, no? Based on our computation, and then given na rin naman, no? 590. And then 3 days. Bakit 3 days? Balikan natin yung calendar. 29, 30, and 31. So dapat yan ay mapasama sa expense ni March. So kaya 3 days. Meron tayong 2 empleyado times 2 employees equals 3,540. That is the salaries expense that should be recognized for the month of March since that is part of March expense. Next illustration. Interest expense naman, no? So March 1, borrowed an 80,000 from CIM Bank. Issued a promissory note that carried a 20% interest per annum. Both the interest and the principal will be payable in 1 year. So yan. So ito yung ating gagawing record nung March 31. So bakit tayo magre-recognize ng expense for interest? So paano na compute yan, no? So remember na ang mayroon tayong formula, no? Na-discuss na natin siya sa business mathematics. Interest is equal to principal times rate times time. So sabi nung March 1, tayo daw ay nangutang kay bangko ng 80,000. Nag-issue tayo ng promissory note. So it means nung March 1, mayroon tayong record dito na cash, debit, 80,000, and then credit to notes payable, 80,000. So at the end of the month, kailangan nating mag-recognize ng interest expense. Bakit? Kasi yung ating inutang na 80,000 ay meron daw siyang 20% interest per annum. 20% interest per annum. So, i-compute natin ang interest nitong 80,000 na inutang natin. So 80,000 times, that is the principal amount, times the rate is 20% or 0.20, times 1/20. Bakit times 1/20? Because ang atin lang namang i-record for this time ay 1 month interest expense. Right? So 1 month interest expense. That's why times 1/12. And the answer is 1,333.33. That is our interest expense for the month of March and interest payable. So, yan ay ating babayaran pa. No? Babayaran pa natin yan. Kaya meron tayong credit na interest payable, the same amount, 1,333.33. Okay, next is accrued revenues naman. So kanina accrued expenses, this time accrued revenues. So an entity may provide services during the period that are neither paid for by the clients nor billed at the end of the period. The value of this service represent revenue earned by the entity. Any revenue that has been earned but not recorded during the accounting period calls for an adjusting entry that debits an assets account and credits an income account. So ano nung scenario naman kaya nito, no? So let's say nung March 31, suppose John's company agreed to render the service in the afternoon of March 31, no? So hapon na, March 31 ay mayroong magpo-provide ng service itong si John's company. The entity intended to charge the fee of 3,400 for the service which is earned but unbilled. Of course, hapon na, no? Hapon na, halimbawa, let's say for example, itong company ito ay ano ba mga kadalas, mga catering. Let's say for example, catering, no? Hapon na nagpa-cater. And then hindi na niya nasingil, no? Hindi na niya singil pero na-provide na niya yung service. Natapos na, no, halimbawa nung alas 6, hindi na nagkita yung customer saka itong si John's company kasi nga marahil ay pagod na, no? Marahil ay nawala, nagkawa ng, let's say for example nga ay handaan niya, no, catering, no? So na-provide naman na niya yung service at meron na silang agreement nung afternoon na sige, biglaan siguro ito, biglaan na sige, magpa-cater dito halimbawa sa lugar na ito. So it means mayroon na silang agreement na ito nga daw yung babayaran, no, 3,400 for the service. So si accountant, since alam naman niya na mayroon ng kontrata na magpo-provide ng service for that afternoon, so kailangan na niyang i-record si revenue even na hindi pa nabibuild, no? Kinabukasan pa niya gagawin yung billing. Why? Because the service was already provided during that month, no? March 31. Inabot nga lamang ng cut-off, no? So kinabukasan niya mabibuild. But that service is part of March revenue. Kaya on that day, no, before mag-closing or bago umuwi si accountant, kailangan na niyang mag-record ng accounts receivable na 3,400 and then service revenue na 3,400 since that services provided is part of March transactions. Yan. So hindi mo siya sasabihin na ay hindi ko pa nabibuild, no? Hindi ko pa na papadalhan ng billing si customer kasi nga hapon na, no? Ay ano na, April na napadalhan. So April na ire-record. Hindi gano'n, no? Kasi na-provide yung service during March pa, kaya dapat yung revenue na yan ay kabilang or masasama sa March transaction kahit pa ma-build mo pa siya ng April 5 pa man yan or succeeding days. Ay, ang pinag-uusapan natin dito kasi ay kung kailan na-provide yung services. Okay? So that is the entries for that scenario. let's have another illustration. No? Assume that the entity has an accounts receivable of 20,000. Based on prior experience indicates an expected 1% average uncollectible account. So ito naman sa mga accounts receivable na medyo nagtatagal na, no? May mga aging na, and then hindi na masingil, and then sabi, based on prior experience, 1% of the accounts receivable hindi na yun makokolekta. No? Yung may mga utang sa company, hindi na daw nakokolekta, 1% ay hindi na nakokolekta. Kaya at the end of the month, magre-record din tayo, no, ng uncollectible account expense. That is 200. Saan ang galing yan? 20,000 times 1%, that is 200. No? Allowance for doubtful accounts or allowance for uncollectible accounts. No? Ito, sometimes ang tawag dito ay bad debt expense. No? Instead of uncollectible accounts expense, sometimes ang tawag dito ay bad debts expense. No, kapag bad debts expense ang nasa chart of accounts, yun ang inyong gagamitin. Hindi bad breath, no? Bad debts expense. Effects of omitting adjustments. So ano ba yung mga maaaring maging epekto kapag hindi ka nagkaroon ng adjusting entries at the end of the month or accounting period? When an accountant failed to include the proper adjusting entries, the resulting financial statements will not accurately reflect the financial positions. Okay, ano yung financial position? You will be discussing that on your fundamentals of ABM part 2 next school year, first sem. So that is a balance sheet. No, ibig sabihin, pag sinabing balance sheet, involves diyan ang mga asset account, liabilities account, and owner's equity account. So it means kung hindi daw nakapag or nakalimutang magkaroon ng adjustment entry like yung ating ginawa kanina, hindi na-update ang balance ni prepaid expenses. So it means yung kanina 6,000 pa rin. 6,000 pa rin ang mapapasama sa balance sheet na hindi naman na dapat kasi nga na-expired na or nagamit na yung ano ba yung example natin? Insurance. Kanina, no? Hindi na 6,000 yung prepaid insurance, dapat 4,000 na lang ang magre-reflect sa balance sheet. But if, yun nga, hindi tayo nag-record, nagkaroon ng adjustment, 6,000 pa rin ang magre-reflect sa financial position at malaking problema yun. Ibig sabihin, malaki yung asset natin na mare-report. But ay reality, hindi naman. No? Kasi nga, nagamit na, o nabawasan na. Okay? Sa financial performance naman, or yung tinatawag na income statement, malaki rin ang ating ma-generate na income. Bakit? Hindi kasi tayo nag-record ng expense. So remember, ito ang formula in computing income is income less expenses. That is your net profit. No, ay kung hindi tayo nag-record ng expenses, puro income na lamang ang makikita. Ay di malaki yung income, ay laking problema din yan. No? Kasi malaki ang babayaran mo kay BIR pag puro income ang nasa yung financial statements. No? Inaccuracies in one accounting period can cause further inaccuracies the statement for subsequent period. Ito yung ito yung masakit diyan, no? Kapag hindi ka nag-record ngayon, madadala ito sa mga susunod na mga period or mga months, no? So yung pagkakamali ngayon, madadala yan sa mga susunod na mga buwan, no? Inaccuracies in one accounting period can cause further inaccuracies in the statement for subsequent period. No? May effect, no? Hindi lamang for this month, but for the succeeding month. Bakit? Let's say for example, hindi ka ngayon nag-record, ay di, ang gagawin mo, magre-record ka for the next month. Ay ano mangyayari? Napakalaki ng i-record mo namang expense sa next month. O, di ba? So, hindi talaga maganda, nakakalimutan mong magkaroon ng adjustment. So make an adjustment as necessary as possible. Okay? Because yan ang magiging effect once you omit an adjustment for that period. All right, I think that's it for this topic, adjustment. And I have some assignment na lang ito. Make an adjustment entry for the following scenario and use the chart of accounts below. Okay, so assignment, 7 lang naman ito, no? 7 scenario, and then you need to record an adjusting entry. So by the way, after recording adjustment entries, of course, next process pa rin, post it to the general ledger. So the same process, then after you post it to the general ledger, dyan naman tayo magkakaroon ng adjusted trial balance. More on copy-paste pa rin. No? Adjusted trial balance naman ang mangyayari. Paano yun? Let's say for example, itong nirecord natin ito, uncollectible accounts expense. So, ikakopy lang natin to sa general ledger. And then, once na makopy na natin sa general ledger, ayan, gagawa naman tayo ngayon ng adjusted trial balance na. Because yung adjusted trial balance, that will be the basis for preparation of financial statements. Yan ang magiging basihan para tayo ay makapag-prepare ng financial statements, and then gagawin nyo yan next school year. And hopefully, naintindihan nyo ito. Maganda yung foundation kasi next school year naman, more on na lang talaga kayo, more on copy-paste na lang talaga. No? May data na, and then you're going to make a financial statements, no? Analysis, and more on bank reconciliation, preparation of income tax return, no? Sana ay ma-discuss nyo ng details, income tax return, and then pinakamahirap yung bank reconciliation. So that's the end of our SEM, no? That's the end of our SEM discussion. And then next meeting, we will have a very long quiz, no? Very long quiz talaga. Ang coverage from cover to cover of this subject, no? So lahat ng atin diniscuss from day 1 until now, part of our long quiz next meeting. So we don't have any discussion next meeting. Kapag natapos ng maaga yung long quiz, ay pwede na kaagad mag-leave para may time pa kayo to prepare for your research. And also yung aking final requirements to be submitted on May 12. No, I think May 12 is your title defense. So dadalhin nyo na rin yung ating columnar. And then that will be the basis of your performance task for my subject, Fundamentals of ABM Part 1. No? So medyo marami akong requirements sa inyo. No? So pagpasensyahan nyo na at last naman na yan. At next school year ay kita-kita na lamang, no, kung sakaling magkita-kita pa tayo, no. So that's the end of our discussion. So this assignment ay to be submitted on Friday. And ano nga bang date sa Friday? To be submitted on, let me check my calendar. To be submitted on April 29, no? April 29, dapat nasa akin na yan. Kahit isulat nyo na lamang sa notebook, wag nyo nang ilagay sa columnar, since ang gusto ko lang makita sa columnar ay yung ating final requirements. Final requirement na send ko na sa inyo. So, na-discuss ko na, wala na akong utang sa inyo, no? Na-discuss ko na lahat from journal entry, posting to general ledger, unadjusted trial balance, adjustments, ito yon, and then adjusted trial balance. The same lang din naman ng unadjusted yon, more on copy paste. Yun nga lamang, idaragdag nyo na itong adjustments. Okay? So that's it, and hopefully may natutunan. Kung wala, sayang naman, no, kung wala. And then, yeah, you can still message me if you have some questions. Mahaba pa yung ating time. I think mahaba pa yung inyong time since I think your last day will be on May 12 or 13. May 13. So, hanggang May 13, pwede nyo pa akong message. And even after May 13, no, I'm still available naman sa inyong mga question regarding basic accounting. And ako may dream kasi sana no, na bago kayo gumraduate, hindi ko na nagawa sa grade 12, bago kayo gumraduate ay magkaroon kayo ng assessment sa TESDA, which is the National Certificate for Bookkeeping, NC3. So once you pass that one, pwede kayong mag-work na kaagad, no? You are competent, and then pwede na kayong maging bookkeeper or accounting assistant, accounting clerk once you pass that examination. So ganito lang naman yung ine-exam dyan, and madali lang. TESDA ang mag-a-assess. Merong assessor. Okay, so that's it, and thank you so much. See you on next meeting, the last meeting for this subject, and that will be on May 6th. Now, May 6th, prepare yourself because we have a very long quiz. Thank you, ABM.